Next we will hear from Professor Neil Hamilton. Professor Hamilton is the Dwight D. Opperman Chair of Law and Director of the Agricultural Law Center at Drake University Law School. As one of the nation's leading authorities on the role of law in shaping agriculture and the food system, Professor Hamilton has lectured throughout the United States and in 20 other countries. He has taught agricultural law for 30 years and has written more than 4 dozen law review articles and several books on food and agricultural law issues. Each year, he serves as a visiting professor within the LLM program in agricultural food law, which he's been doing here for the past week. In addition to teaching class each semester, Professor Hamilton advises the Drake Journal of Agricultural Law, working with students on finding opportunities to work with agricultural law projects. He also supervises the center's research initiatives on the local food, sustainable land tenure, and policies to assist new farmers. Professor Hamilton served as the co-chair of the USDA Small Farms Advisory Committee. He currently serves on the advisory board for the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture in Iowa State University and as the chair of the Iowa Food Policy Council. He serves on the boards of the Seed Savers Exchange and the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. He is a former president of the American Agricultural Law Association and has served as a consultant for many international organizations. Thank you.
Her introduction reminds me that maybe I didn't respond to an email about a bio, but
You have 1 minute left.
that would make my mom proud. But there are a couple things that I'm no longer the chair of the Food Policy Council. I was for 6 years while Governor Vilsack was our governor, and now, of course, he's the secretary. But most of it's right. And my gosh, what a wonderful opportunity and a treat to be back. And thank you, Jordan, for the introduction, and Michael for your kind words. Thanks to all of you for the opportunity to be here. You know, it's always a pleasure for me to come back to Fayetteville and to this law school. This is where I began my teaching career 34 years ago as a 27-year-old, 2 year out of law school, helping teach the LLM classes. And I'm so pleased to have a friendship and partnership with Susan and to come back and teach classes a couple times a year. Some of you I had the opportunity to have you in class, and it's always great to see old friends like Janie and Michael, and appreciate the work that Sarah does. And so I'm proud to be here to help recognize and congratulate the journal on these 10 years of excellence, pioneering, leading the way in the whole development of food law and policy. You know, consider the changes that have gone on in our food system and law over the last 10 years. And I threw together a few pictures just so you don't have to watch me or you have something else you can do. But and so some of them are family pictures. But, you know, careers were launched here, new interests were found, Michael and Susan's work and food law, new opportunities to think and to write and publish, and that article I wrote about food democracy. I'm sure everybody I've talked to since gets tired of hearing me talk about it. And as Michael has said, you know, we see new interest in food law and the proliferation of programs at schools. But of course, you in Arkansas, I think, should be proud of the leadership that you've taken, stretching back 35 years, really, with the LLM program. And I'm proud, certainly, of our partnership and work at Drake, and the fact that we've never really competed. We've always collaborated. And, you know, the real testament of our work, and certainly your work in particular, are the hundreds of students who have received the LLM degree, the hundreds of students that have served on the journal staff and had the opportunity to develop their skills, the students that have taken our classes through the years, and certainly your fellows' classes, and, you know, they're making their marks in their own fields, right, and finding their careers, and you know, the array of people who have come through the Arkansas program and what they're doing now around the country and the world is remarkable. And that's really, you know, we may write a lot of articles and teach classes, but, you know, what we do, our contribution, I think, is found in the people that we've help with their educations and can take pride in their careers. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to share a few words. And here you're looking at some pictures. We're talking about going through changes. We don't farm like our parents did. That previous picture was a picture of my dad, Lowell, and there's my mom, Zell, on our farm in southern Iowa. We don't farm quite like we used to. We all go through changes in life. Oh, there's little Neil. Not many folks show naked pictures of themselves. And agriculture has changed too. We all go through some changes. And so, I want, and there's, one of the other things that we do. My wife and I are very involved in farming and agriculture and raising food and selling it to restaurants. So I want to talk a little bit about some ideas and the future of food law and policy. It's all around us. The debates over labeling, from added sugars to GMOs. Food law is only as far away as the next time you pick up a newspaper. And one measure of that, I think, you can see is proliferation of state legislative ideas. I teach a class on legislation, and we have a legislative program because we're in the state capitol in Des Moines. But these ideas are just things that have been in the news just in recent days and weeks. The food freedom idea, right? Wyoming passed a law on food freedom. Missouri and Virginia and other states are considering food freedom, right? Giving people the opportunity to sell whatever they raise from their farm to consumers free of any type of licensing, inspection, certification by the state or local government. If you, in fact, either inform them, or some might say warn them, that that's what you're in fact doing. A good idea, maybe bad idea as time has come, we'll see. The Michigan proposal, which is an urban agricultural issue. Basically the challenge, can you farm your front yard, right? Under zoning ordinances, and a bill introduced in the legislature that the title seems a little overwritten, but it's the Homestead Subsistence Farming Act, right? Which I guess is one way to describe whether or not I can plant a garden in my front yard, but it's an interesting idea. And of course the New Jersey fight over gestation crates and the governor's veto. Oh my gosh, why would Governor Christie veto a bill on gestation crates? So he comes to Iowa frequently, as almost everybody does, it seems, recently, including former governors of your state. The California hen spacing debate that's back in the Ninth Circuit and being appealed by a number of states like Iowa and Missouri and others. The ag-gag issues, and I think you said you're going to have an ag-gag article in your newest issue, and legislative ideas. Just this week in New Mexico and I think Idaho legislatures were either acting or not. Even seed libraries, right? I've been on the board of the Seed Savers Exchange, an heirloom vegetable organization, for 20-some years. And even seed libraries, the free exchange of seeds, has come under scrutiny by some seed licensing authorities, including in Minnesota. And so there's some happy people having something to eat at Sunstead. We know these examples are varied, but as varied as they are, they all involve several commonalities. They all involve the law, they all involve state legislatures, and they all involve food in some form. And they also involve in some form the desire for people for better food, and a better food in whatever that may mean to them. And I like to talk about kind of the local food movement in the context of being better food, because it's really a question of satisfaction and a question of choice, which is, I think, the fundamental idea in the food democracy ideas. These proposals, I think, they'll also help illustrate some of the conflicts or fault lines in our nation, in our debate about food. Its safety, how it's raised, where it was raised, what you can say about it, or what you can stop somebody else from saying about it, or what you can know about it. And so these also, in some ways, oftentimes represent conflicts between agriculture and farmers, or at least parts of agriculture, and those who may be seeking alternatives or choice. And so that brings me, you say finally and eventually, to my theme, right? Which is this, when they ask me, well, give a name for this talk. And so I said, well, how about keeping the farm or the farmer in food policy and law? About the importance of marrying what I think is an understanding and appreciation for farming and agricultural law with a focus on food law and policy. And I think that's something that both our program at Drake and the program here at Arkansas do in large part because our involvement in food came largely out of our history of looking at agriculture and expanding the breadth of what we were doing. And so what do I mean by keeping the farm or the farm in food policy? First, I think it means remembering that all of these food issues at some point involve land, and that's why land tenure issues are significant. Who owns it, how it's farmed, how people have access to it, how it's used, and these issues of land tenure, and those of you who were students in my class know this is partly what we talked about this week. If you didn't pick that up, then I apologize. But it's the issue that if part of what I try to do is stand on a pop can and look over into the future a little bit, I think that land tenure questions are a significant issue in the future of agriculture for a variety of reasons, some of which I certainly won't go into here. Secondly, I think it also means remembering that all of these issues involve people making decisions, right? I mean, these food questions and the use of technologies and food safety questions don't just happen by accident. They happen because people are deciding to do things in particular ways. And so how to farm, what crops to raise, what products to market, how to market it, how to respond to political issues and market forces. And of course, those actions on the part of farmers and agriculturalists and food companies are also mirrored on the other side by consumers and people on the other side of these equations. I think third, it also, at least from my perspective, means trying to at least understand how the real world works, right? I mean, whether that's the politics of how lawmaking actually happens and rulemaking and regulations happen, how market forces happen, the decisions that are made by consumers as individuals or the food companies, who in many ways are the ultimate arbiter of the acceptability of a particular practice or a particular type of food. And so in some ways, the key is, as I say, food starts with a farm and with a farmer. And as a result, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I believe there's at least a difference in coming to food law and policy issues from a perspective or understanding of agriculture and farming as compared to coming to food issues only as an eater or as a consumer. And the difference may not change your view, or it may not even change how an issue is resolved at the end of the day, but I think in many ways it may deepen your understanding for the issues and for why they're significant. And it certainly may improve your understanding for why agriculture and farmers may in fact act or be opposed or react to proposed changes in ways that they might. One's angle of approach can impact the nature of the examination. Think about something like direct farm marketing, something I wrote a book on 15 years ago, and farmers markets, right? And you can approach those as a new farmer issue, as an economic development issue, right, as a real, right, important part of kind of the economics of farming. But you can also approach them from a different perspective. You could look at them on the question of addressing food deserts, of addressing food access, of dealing with social justice issues and how food's made available in the community. And in fact, both perspectives are valid. But if you haven't thought about what it actually takes to be a small farmer and a direct marketer and the challenges that are involved with it, just saying we ought to have a farmer's market doesn't quite work, right? Because it's not an easy task. And so the reality, I think, is that both perspectives are valuable, but the emphasis and the point of departure can certainly affect how the subject's considered and also the legal and policy ideas that emerge. One issue, another way of thinking about it is who is the law serving and how? At least a key point that I believe is that the traditional focus of agricultural law, and I wrote about this in an article called Harvesting the Law that looked at 30 years of development of these issues. But the traditional focus was on people, right? Was on the farmers, right? That was who the law was serving and their needs, right? People like Lowland Zell and my neighbors, and whether it was land security or income or a safe environment. And unfortunately, to some extent, I think the increased corporatism of the U.S. economy and to some extent the increasingly industrialized nature of at least much of agriculture in terms of its structure, and if not its structure, at least its scale, has in some ways helped shift the focus of law, or perhaps our perception of what exact role is it doing. And unfortunately, what we hear oftentimes from agriculture may be as much the voices of the company who market inputs to it or market the products of it, as opposed to the families and the people who are actually part of it. That makes it easier, I think, for us to forget the human dimension to farming and conclude that most farms are factory and that most farmers are evil. Though if you ask most farmers, they would say probably no to both. But so anyway, so why does it matter? Why is it important for us to have an understanding of agriculture and farming? Well, so many of the key and important issues or controversies in the field of food, and if not food, at least agricultural policy, are based on either agricultural production practices or understanding how and why farmers might act as they do. And I put up a list of a few of them here. The renewable fuel standards, right? The whole issue about ethanol. And the fact in my state, we take almost 60% of our corn crop and grind it up and turn it into ethanol. 40% of the nation's corn crop. And the EPA's idea to perhaps reel back the RFS, and the oil industry's proposals to abolish the RFS, and supported by some certainly livestock groups, are significant issues. And they have an impact on land values, just as they have an impact on food prices. The FDA and proposals on feeding antibiotics as a growth promoter, as opposed to a disease suppressant. There are clearly human health issues related to this practice, though you can certainly find people who can deny that connection. The 2014 Farm Bill, and all the things that it touches on, right, from conservation to rural development to SNAP to the real guts of it, crop insurance and farm program. The Food Safety Modernization Act, all right, something that most of you have studied and my other colleagues up here know certainly much better than I do, but it is and does have an impact on small direct marketing farmers. And I think the certainly concern about how well the law will work, at least for some audiences, in terms of actually improving food safety, perhaps as opposed to reducing competition. And then GMO labeling debates, right? And that's certainly something you're familiar with. And the legal fights over production practices. And that could range from feeding ractopamine to the development of herbicide-resistant weeds, and now the need for a new generation of even harsher products, and that may in fact just be a second installment of the same issue. Well, so all of these issues and debates, I think, involve important food policy questions and also farming questions. They relate to food costs and supply, and there are real issues here. The RFS is a significant issue, and there isn't any doubt that tinkering with it is probably going to have a destabilizing impact potentially on the economics in the upper Midwest and farmland values. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be evaluated as a policy, but you at least have to recognize the tinkering. There are human health issues involved with the overuse of antibiotics. There are serious, I think, political equity questions about the SNAP program and the unwillingness of the agriculture community to support the SNAP program, which I think is gives agriculture a black eye that it probably doesn't need. But, our ability to address or to resolve these different policy issues, I don't think is going to be possible without addressing or at least trying to understand the type of resistance or the opposition that agriculture and farming sectors might take to them, and appreciating their perspectives, I think, is part of the challenge. I'm not saying that you have to grow up on a farm to be an effective teacher or scholar in food law. But to the extent that you don't understand agriculture or make an attempt to understand agriculture and to recognize the significant variations that are found in America's food and agricultural system, then I think you run the risk that your teaching, your scholarship, right, whatever, will be open to criticism as being either one-sided or biased or unrealistic, or maybe worse yet, uninformed. You don't have to agree with farmers about what they do, but if you're going to criticize what they do, then you probably need to understand what it is they do and why they do it, all right? Amen. And then you can have a discussion about the changes that you may think are made. How am I doing on time? 1 minute or 20, guys?
No, you have about 20.
Holy
a little over.
smokes, my gosh, I've got extra pages over there. No, well, so as long as I'm up here and I'll get a few more things off my chest, right? No, one of the issues that I think about is the role of kind of myths or misconceptions, or the things that people say for sure or that they know for sure, which maybe not, are maybe not true, or that there are other perceptions on. And so let me list some of these things, and depending on how I say them, you can either see them as myths or the misconceptions or my opinions on them. Now, one of them is that, not all factory farms are corporate, right? And most farms, even the quote industrial factory farms that apparently populate a state like Iowa, are family owned, right? The use of the word industrial, industrialized, which is certainly one that I've trafficked in a lot, right? I wrote an article about agriculture without farmers, right? The industrialization of American agriculture. But when I wrote about industrialization, and when we passed corporate farming laws and laws that deal with contract production, they were more focused on structure than they were on scale, right? They weren't just an issue of the fact that you were a big farm, and then that's what somehow made you a factory. Corn subsidies don't cause obesity, and ending corn subsidies isn't going to make the obesity problem go away. They may have some contributing dimension to it, to the nature of our food system, but it's not, I think, quite that simple. The fact that we raise a lot of corn and that we subsidize the corn system is certainly something that you can debate. But the issue with ethanol may not be as much about the ethanol itself as it could be about the environmental issues that are connected to basically putting our foot on the gas that much harder, right? In terms of the hundreds of thousands of acres of grassland in Iowa that we've put to the plow to increase. I mean, $8 corn is pretty attractive. Certainly more attractive than the $4 corn that we are now experiencing. But conversely, I don't think the answer to healthy eating or trying to improve better diets isn't to go out and create a parallel system of subsidizing fruit and vegetable production, all right? To kind of somehow, replicate some of the challenges of what we've created with our commodity system, as it might be working on either how we change what people eat, what they know about their food, how the food's available to them, dealing with poverty, which is really, right, the underpinning issue that deals with hunger in the country, and increasing our physical access. I spent a lot of time on new farmers, right? New and beginning farmers. I've written a lot on that subject, America's New Agrarians, and worked with the Secretary and others on that. You know, the reality is that most new farms or small farms are unsustainable, at least economically, right? If the only income they have is from farming, right? If you don't have off-farm income and you don't have health insurance, trying to start a small farm and only live on the farm, right, is difficult. The reality is most people in agriculture, in fact, have off-farm income. But conversely, right, the fact that many small-scale farmers and new farmers and food artisans and people who are coming to this business are subsidized or live in part on off-farm income doesn't make them any less farmers, right, or any less involved in agriculture. Even though I think, right, that certainly parts of agriculture kind of use dog whistle terms like production agriculture, right, to basically try to describe who they think are real farmers and who aren't real farmers. One of the things I think that Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack, and I think Janie would agree, one of the things he tried to do and has done with that department is make it important and relevant to all people, all farmers, regardless of their size or type, and all consumers, regardless of their means. And, right, has done that in part by opening up programs in ways that haven't been opened before. Well, animal rights and animal welfare are not the same thing. I mean, 35 years ago or 34 years ago, I taught a class here with Professor Leffler on animal rights and food safety, right? And the whole animal welfare, animal rights distinction, right? Which is, I believe, a significant legal one. But there's a great deal of unwillingness, certainly on the part of agriculture, farm people, to recognize the difference, right? And in fact, that's why you have many people say, "Oh, all these vegetarians, the only thing they want to do is end animal agriculture." Well, no, not really. They want to eat a plant-based diet. But on the other hand, no doubt there are vegetarians who would just as soon see, right, animal agriculture disappear. And there are people who believe that every way that you raise an animal is somehow inhumane, right? But the reality is there are a variety of animal production practices. Well, there are other issues, and I don't know whether there is much myths. I mean, as Janie knows, you could get into a good debate about how many farmers we actually have in the country. The census tells us 2.2 million. Though other folks would say, well, maybe there's only about 300,000 or 400,000 real farmers. But if you squint and really look, there may be 10 million of us, right? I mean, if a big garden could get you to the point where you would qualify to be a farmer, the number may not be as important as the reason why you're asking the question, right? Or why the status of being a farmer is an issue. And I've always said that in many ways, the status of being a farmer is in your own mind, right? I mean, it's in the mind of the person that's doing it. But a couple other myths. I think I've still got a couple more myths. Okay.
5 to 10.
You're 5 to 10. See how I'm doing, right? She says 5. She says you're running out of gas,
Roughly.
Professor. Another one that I have to confront a lot in Iowa is the whole myth that we feed the world. Right? Oh, we feed the world. We don't feed the world. Right? And we couldn't feed the world if the world asked us to. The percent of food that's consumed in the world that moves in international trade is somewhere less than 10%, and probably even less than that. The world feeds itself. We can help the world feed itself. But the problem with the we feed the world kind of mythology is how often it's used as kind of the showstopper. Well, we should have a debate about improving water quality. Do that, we won't be able to feed the world. If we don't use this practice, we're feeding the world, remember? Right? And I think a lot of people believe they're feeding the world. I mean, it's a very powerful, right, organizing theme. And it's a very powerful, personal ideal. This is what I'm doing. right? I'm feeding the world. And okay, we are, right? And saying that you don't doesn't make you any less than a farmer. And maybe it'd be as valuable for us to say, I'm feeding my neighbors, all right? Or I'm feeding my community. But that's one to think about. Well, a couple of the things that I'd just like to say that these are things that I think are truths, or things that I believe. One, I've already mentioned that a key issue in agriculture is the question of land ownership. The wealth that's related to owning land, the decision-making authority that goes along with owning it, the division between operation, right, and ownership, which we're seeing in terms of the changes in land tenure and the increase in tenancy. These are critical issues that are going to affect future opportunities, whether for new farmers or the ability of the USDA to serve the nation, or our ability to deal with underlying environmental questions as well as social and economic equality in rural America. Crop insurance. Crop insurance has become this incredibly important federal policy that influences the economics of agriculture. And it's going to continue to be essential to commodity production and the financing and really the kind of the economic operation of agriculture. And there's almost nobody not involved in agriculture who understands crop insurance, and most folks involved in farming don't understand it either. I don't think, right? I certainly don't even pretend to understand it, and I probably should. Another point I think is to recognize that our current food and farming and agricultural system couldn't function without the availability of the current large supply of immigrant workers, many of them undocumented. And if we aren't willing to deal with America's immigration issues and to deal with the reality of the way our food system operates, then we're going to face some interesting challenges. Well, a couple final comments. GMOs. I've been involved in plant genetic resource issues. I chaired the National Genetic Resource Advisory Council for the USDA back in the 90s and did a lot of intellectual property rights work around GMOs. And from my perspective, I don't necessarily believe that GMO technology itself is somehow inherently evil or risky. There might be risks, but the key is I think you have to recognize that it's different, right? It's not conventional crop breeding. Farmers haven't been involved in genetic modification of the type we're talking about now for centuries, right? As I've said before, a flounder might eat a strawberry, but they wouldn't mate with each other, right? And the fact that you can take a flounder gene and put it in a strawberry to make it frost resistant, you have to at least recognize as a significant difference in terms of the technology. And it raises issues, right? Whether they may be moral or crossing the species barrier or whatever might be involved. But, the real issue, I think, with biotechnology is the fact that we've probably overused it and oversold it, right? That, and what I mean by overused it and oversold it? Well, we've oversold it in the sense that you hear about biotechnology and, it's relative, at least in commodity production in Iowa, limited to a handful of technologies, right? Glyphosate resistance, putting in, BT into corn to deal with rootworms, all right? Those are not inherently yield-enhancing technologies. They don't put an extra bean in a pod the way, right, a traditional plant breeding might. Yes, they may well reduce the weed resistance, right, or the weed pressure, which in fact can enhance yields, but that means that these technologies are yield enhancing in the same way that a hoe is, right? Because it also suppresses weeds, right? But yet you'll never read a story about biotechnology without, it's made us more productive. Well, it's made us more productive because it fits to a system of agriculture, but it isn't, right, the same thing as traditional crop breeding. Crop breeders in here can correct me if I'm wrong. So I think the real, right, problem with it has been the hubris of how it's been promoted And you see that in the development of weed resistance, right? Of herbicide-resistant weeds. And the fact that we basically, in 15 years, have frittered away the first generation of this technology, right? In ways that were predictable. If you overuse it, put it into everything, and spray it everywhere, are you surprised that you've selected for more resistant weeds? Which we have. So now our answer is to do what? Well, to go back to an earlier, harsher generation of chemicals and to breed plants to be, right, resistant to those, and now we'll use those. And now we'll spray those chemicals, right? And, in a state like Iowa that's expanded the grape industry the way that we have for wineries, well, the grape industry, we had one in Iowa, right, before World War II, and it went away as soon as we started using, right, 2,4-D and other products. And the new formulations of these products are going to raise significant legal challenges and conflicts, I'm afraid, in rural America, unless we, of course, market them differently. Well, to conclude, the American food and agriculture sectors face a period of conflict, I think, and change. An aging farm population, right? Increasing the scale of farms, more concerned about environmental impacts, challenges to new technologies, food safety concerns are just some of the issues that face us. And communicating with new audiences who are more willing to scrutinize the status quo, and the arguments made to defend or support agriculture are part of this mix, right? And in fact, that's where a lot of people working in the space of food policy and law live. So this context presents controversies and conflicts, such as labeling, the role of agriculture in water pollution, but there are also opportunities, right? New families, right, coming in, looking for a future in farming, new rural economic activity. And some of these controversies are going to be resolved through court cases and through the application of new legislative ideas like the ones we talked about before. But many of these issues are going to rest on kind of a historic foundation of land ownership and the laws that we've had in place that have shaped agriculture as it's developed over the centuries. And one of the challenges I think that we find here is this kind of idea of absolutism, right? And this comes from both sides of the situation. The idea that all industrial agriculture is bad, all Midwestern commodity production and confined livestock production is bad. Anybody who's interested in animal welfare, right, wants to end as a radical vegetarian who wants to end livestock production. The reality is that, and the truth is that the resolution of most of these issues probably is somewhere in the middle, right? Or if not in the middle, it's in providing people with choices and alternatives, right? So that they can maximize their own satisfaction. And so understanding the food and agriculture policy debates and contributing to real social progress and legal change, I think requires a more informed, nuanced, and sensitive understanding of how things work in the real world, in agriculture and in the law, right? So I'm going to go ahead and end. I got a few more pictures to show you. Some more pictures in our garden and new interest in farming. We've always had an interest in farming. There's my favorite farmer, my wife. There's our favorite leader. You know what? This was just about the same time he asked a farm audience in Dallas County. I was sitting 30 feet away from him if they'd been to Whole Foods and priced arugula that day. There was a groan went up from the audience. Time magazine had a picture of a stem of arugula and a can of beer comparing Hillary and the president. And as I've always said, part of our opportunity was to help him unleash his inner arugula. And as you know, we elected him not just once, but twice. And the conclusion, I think, is that the future for food law and policy is bright, and the issues are many. And the role for law and lawyers is only going to continue to grow. And as we work to help farmers and consumers and food companies deal with the policy challenge they face, our efforts will only be improved if we remember that food starts on a farm and probably involves the farmer. And little girls and kitties. Because they make people smile. So, With that, I hope I didn't overstep.
Oh, no, I think we're gonna take just a brief 5 to 10 minute break. People can get up, shameless plug, there's subscriptions to the journal in the back if you're interested. And we'll just, return here pretty shortly, so.